Wall Street placing its final projections on who could win the 2024 election. All firms seem to agree on one thing: the race is going to be extremely tight. UBS's election prediction, published in late October, was split 50-50 for a Trump or a Harris win, calling the most likely outcome with a 45% probability a Harris win with a Republican Senate. Meanwhile, Oxford economics team sees former President Trump leading in just enough key battleground states to win, but did acknowledge razor-thin polling margins mean a Harris victory is still possible as of November 1st. In a note published Monday, Stifel's chief Washington policy strategist Brian Gardner wrote that he believes a Trump victory is still most likely, but several indicators have moved in Harris's direction in the recent days here. Our next guest forecasts a slim electoral win by Vice President Kamala Harris. So joining us now to discuss, we've got Henrietta Treyz, managing partner and director of economic policy research at Veda Partners. Henrietta, it's great to speak with you here. Just walk us through your case for a Harris win. What's behind that call?
The call is really premised on the suburbs. As you know, the suburbs have decided the last two election cycles, and Donald Trump won them in 2016 by 4 points over Hillary Clinton. And in 2020, Biden was able to bring those voters back into the Democratic fold and won by 2 points. Right now, in key states, Kamala is ahead by 4 to 6 points with those suburban voters. The sort of shock poll of the week, the Iowa Seltzer poll, shows Kamala Harris ahead 23 points in the suburbs of Iowa, which is really telling. So my concentration is really on those voters. They vote in the highest numbers, and they are the swing voters in the United States. So tracking them has historically been very informative.
So then, Henrietta, how do you expect, I guess, what do you expect Wall Street's reaction to be, just given the fact that we have seen this favoring of the Trump trade, the unwinding, what that could look like? What is top of mind here for investors today?
Right. And the investment community got very overconfident in the poly market forecast earlier in October when some big bets were put on and Trump's odds skyrocketed to the 60% range, the highest in the entire cycle, mostly because of a couple of bets and not a representation of, a good analysis of the state of the election. Certainly there wasn't any polling data to suggest that much of a swing. So now I think the street is sort of unwinding some of that optimism and following what we've seen in the last couple of days, which I think have been stronger for Kamala Harris in the final days of the election than Donald Trump. She has won the late-breaking deciders as the Harris campaign has sort of disclosed in the last couple of days from their polling, and also the polling that we've seen since from various outlets, including some Republican pollsters and Democratic pollsters. So I think the final days of the election, when you have sort of 23% of the electorate that's undecided from the independent basket, those are typically youth voters. Those are Black and Latino voters. And that's where you're seeing the shift and I think the change in the final days.
Henrietta, when do you think we'll start to know?
I'm very excited that Georgia changed their laws, and they're a critical swing state this year. As you know, Joe Biden won them in 2020, and my forecast is for Donald Trump to win back the state this cycle. But we will start to know some of those key counties out of Georgia at 8 p.m. So I'm really excited and optimistic that we'll have some sort of indication of whether things are going as anticipated, whether it's still a really tight election, but it's an early opportunity for an upset. I do think that Donald Trump will win the state. So if for whatever reason he is not winning in core counties there, we're going to watch Fulton County turnout. If there's anything less than, a pretty strong victory for Trump there, it could portend some changes to the polling that has been missed, and maybe over enthusiasm for Trump in the polls right now.
Henrietta, where could investors be caught offside, just given the fact of how much has already been factored in?
Well, I do think that there is the potential for upset for sure. I mean, with polls this close and with substantial turnout from Republicans in rural areas, there is the possibility that Trump runs away with it. But similarly, there's also a possibility that Harris runs away with it. And we know the outcome by 2 or 3 this morning. I think that would come as a surprise to people.
It's interesting because you mentioned the polling errors, and they could really go either way, right? In midterms in 2022, the polling indicated that voters were focused on the economy, and then voters ended up turning out more on abortion. Then in 2016, of course, there was an indication of Clinton winning. It ended up being Trump. Which of those two errors on the polling side of things do you anticipate being more likely this time around?
I think the abortion conversation is something that is still underappreciated. You've seen tremendous engagement from young female voters, just in general, and women vote more than men in this country. We're 52% of the electorate. So undersampling the import of abortion in this conversation is probably what would create a surprise scenario for Kamala Harris, especially in a state like Georgia, where Democrats, let's remember, it was a 9% inflation environment, and there was a massive surge of immigration happening at the time, and Democrats ran away with the midterm elections. That was because of abortion. And it's still on the ballot in a lot of these key states, Arizona, Michigan, and it's what turned Iowa. So I think it's undersampled and underappreciated how much of a core driver that is. When you go to the ballot box, voters feel like maybe I can't do too much about the economy. It is turned around substantially. Inflation is down. Gas prices are below $3 nationally. You're in the ballot box. What can I actually effectuate change around? Is it immigration or is it abortion? I think that's going to be the core driver of the conversation.
And beyond that, Henrietta, as you take a look at it in top priorities for investors, at least when it comes to clean energy, what the policy is going to look like there. Beyond that, when it comes to big oil and big and natural gas, I guess given the fact that Kamala Harris entered the race obviously so late. We aren't too familiar with her policy. She's flip-flopped on a lot of things that she's voted for, pressed for in the past, saying that she will now change her stance if she were to be elected in the White House. I'm curious, just from an investor standpoint, has there been a loss of confidence at all, or more investors waiting on the sidelines, just given the fact that it might be more of a show-me sort of story with her presidency?
I think it's really interesting. Here's where I always say, the Senate is so much more important than the presidency. I think people forget that the president is not the one who's going to write the tax bill next year. And quite frankly, a lot of the promises that you make on the campaign trail get tossed by the wayside on November 6th. So I think that that's something to be mindful of. My expectation with 90% odds is that the Senate is Republican. So if you want confidence in a call and you want to invest based off of what's going to happen tomorrow or tonight, I can't believe it's tonight. Really focus on the Senate. The Senate is going to be Republican unless John Tester is able to eke out a win in Montana, which I think is a long shot. And as a result, you kind of already know what the tax bill is going to be next year. The corporate rate will remain unchanged. The individual tax rates are going to be extended. The question is really duration. On the clean energy front, what you just mentioned about the tax credits that Trump has said he would repeal, all the components of the Inflation Reduction Act, I think there's a huge opportunity for investors there, because I don't think that Donald Trump, if he wins in a red wave, will have the votes to repeal the IRA and the clean energy production and manufacturing tax credits. The electric vehicles tax credit might get repealed, but the other pieces for solar, wind, all kinds of other power, batteries, nuclear, there are disproportionately red states that are getting the funding and the job creation from that bill that was passed by the Biden-Harris administration. And as a result, I think Republicans are going to have a really hard time, especially on the House side, repealing any of those tax credits.
It's a great point. Henrietta Treyz, always great to have you. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us this morning. Managing Partner and Director of Economic Policy Research at Veda Partners. Thanks, Henrietta.
Thanks for having me.